I'm out just going for a test drive with the first revision from DRTuned, and realized it's been a while since I've made a video at all, and so I thought I'd make a little view from the driver's seat, time of just daily driving and what it's like with the Supercharger. The tune revision from DRTuned feels great. It's very subtle. He said all he's working on right now is just the air-fuel ratios, and we're just going to go real slow and steady. But I feel like I can feel a little bit of a difference in the mid-range, but it's hard because the car has so much power. So one of the interesting things, so first of all, I'm hoping the camera can pick this up, but if you look on the phone, the fast moving percentage is actually my throttle position. So when it never goes completely to zero, but when it's low, my foot is off the gas. We've got mass airflow, RPM, speed, and then intake temp and coolant temp. One thing that's really interesting to watch is the boost gauge. So it goes from negative to positive in a hurry. And even when I'm doing partial throttle, so if I put it at 2,000 RPM and dip into it a little, it jumps right into some boost and just has this lovely little whine that's just... Slow down for this. In the higher RPM, above 3,000, it just pulls like mad. And oh, I hit the kickdown switch. I got eager. Now, one of the neat things is, especially low down RPM, so I can be in 6th gear at 1,500 RPM, and it's pushing a little bit of boost and accelerating. So I think that's one of the main reasons that I get such good gas mileage, is I find myself not needing to rev the engine as much, because you have this boost that comes in that you can just immediately feel it start to pull and move the car. It's really quite remarkable and has such a satisfying sound. It's just effortless. And that's just at partial throttle without me putting it to the floor. Obviously, it sounds great at higher RPM. One of the interesting things about putting the Supercharger on is there are stretches of roads I hit redline now that I never would have gotten close before because it just jumps up. But honestly, I think one of the things I've come to love the most is the way it does this just effortless, mild boost down at 2,000 RPM, where just... as soon as you ask it to move, it just starts moving, and basically at any RPM. So I'm really happy with that. Obviously, this is a little bit not ideal, so I'm hoping in the holiday season to get to a project to move these gauges and incorporate them somehow, or mount them somehow on the steering column, and then I think that'll look a lot cleaner. And while I'm at it, I'm going to add paddle shifters. So overall, just really impressed and overjoyed really with the performance of the package. If you're out to like drag race and just purely want peak power, it's still probably not the ideal thing. What really makes this feel fast is that it just always has boost anytime you put your foot in it. There's no spool, there's no hesitation. And it's this really gentle boost. So generally it mimics or close to mimics RPM. So up at redline, I can hit 7 PSI. Down at 2,000 RPM, I'll rarely get over 3. So it's a very safe boost, very efficient. So I'm very pleased with that. And I think it just, one of the things that people don't realize about a twin screw is that it's a much more modern and very efficient. It's competitive efficiency with turbos. And one of the things that's unique about it is it's a fixed displacement compressor, meaning that the Supercharger is pumping the exact same amount of air regardless of the RPM. The difference in PSI is actually the resistance from the engine. So one of the things it highlights is that these SkyActiv motors, when I'm down at 1,500 RPM and I have it to the floor, I can only get 1 to 2 PSI because it flows really, really well down at the lower RPM. The PSI only climbs as I get into higher RPM. Even though the compressor is pumping the same amount of air per RPM, regardless of RPM. It is fixed. So what we're actually seeing is it highlighting the behavior and the optimizations of the Skyactiv motor. And you can really tell that it was really optimized for the sub 2000 RPM, right? At 1600 RPM, it's flowing so well that it barely builds any boost. So it's pretty fascinating. And that's part of why a fixed displacement supercharger doesn't really change the character that much of a motor. It mostly highlights its inherent character. Whereas other, turbos can accentuate the torque. Centrifugal superchargers accentuate the high end and not the torque. This is just fixed displacement, so it's just going to be giving the same amount of push, the same amount of air, regardless of RPM. So it's very linear. So you can see it hit 7 for a moment right before I shifted. But most of the time, it's running around at nice mild boost. So from a longevity perspective, it seems like I'm wondering if my engine will actually last longer, because so much of the time I don't need to rev it. I mean, I can be down at 2000 RPM at 40 miles an hour on a slight uphill. I push the gas and it just starts accelerating. So in normal traffic situations, it shifts far, far, far less and tends to stay in lower RPM because it's fun to use the boost rather than having to rev it out. It's just really, really satisfying. Anything over 2000 RPM and it just pulls, and you can feel it immediately just start to move. Now, obviously it's fun to rev it out, but I think I find myself surprised how much yeah, that's still really satisfying. But I'm surprised how much I just enjoy the mild whine and the effortless pull down in the 2000 RPM range. It's really, really satisfying. Now, first gear is kind of useless. It just goes right to redline. I think the funny thing is, the experience of the gears having power now. I mean, I had tuned NA and done everything I could to milk power out of this motor, but it's just not the same. So, I mean, I felt like I had the car pretty fast in first gear before, but second gear was not all there, and third gear really would run out of breath because it just didn't have the power. Now I feel like it's got too much power for first gear. Second gear just pins you, and third gear just keeps on going and pulling. So it's a fun sensation, and it feels transformed and so distinctive. The sound to me is really, really enjoyable. It's subtle. I think some people probably wish it was louder, but so be it. All right.